She was 3 steps from death when his hand clamped over her mouth. The mafia boss didn't raise his voice, didn't reach for a gun. He whispered, "Don't talk," because he saw what no one else did, an execution lining up in real time. And the question isn't why he saved her. It's who was supposed to die if he hadn't. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. The rain against the windows of Carlisle's Steakhouse created a rhythmic backdrop to the soft murmur of late-night conversations and the gentle clink of wine glasses. But at the corner table farthest from the entrance, Nicholas De Angelis sat in absolute stillness. A man in his early 30s with dark, wavy hair that fell just past his collar, Nicholas looked like danger wrapped in expensive fabric. His black suit jacket hung open over a crisp white shirt. No tie, deliberate casualness that somehow made him more intimidating, not less. Intricate tattoos crawled up both hands and disappeared beneath his cuffs, dark art against olive skin that told stories in a language most people couldn't read. More ink decorated his neck, visible above his collar, the kind of permanent decisions that separated his world from theirs. He wasn't there for the perfectly aged ribeye cooling on his plate. He was there because business in his world rarely happened during daylight hours, and restaurants like this one offered the kind of shadows men like him required. Life in the syndicate had taught Nicholas to see what others missed. The tilt of a head, the weight of a glance, the wrong kind of stillness in a room that should feel easy. He'd survived 3 assassination attempts and twice as many betrayals, not because he was the fastest or the cruelest, but because he understood that violence always announced itself if you knew the language. Tonight was supposed to be routine, a simple exchange of information with someone who owed him answers. But the contact was running late, and Nicholas found himself watching the room instead. His tattooed fingers rested motionless on the white tablecloth, a glass of red wine untouched beside his plate. He looked like money and menace in equal measure, the kind of man other diners instinctively avoided looking at directly. Amy Bell didn't have that luxury. She'd been serving his section all evening, moving between tables with practiced efficiency, despite the exhaustion visible in the tightness around her eyes. Late 20s, Latina, with long dark hair pulled back in a professional ponytail that had started to come loose during her shift. She wore the standard uniform white button-down blouse and black slacks, but carried herself with a quiet dignity that the uniform couldn't diminish. Nicholas had noticed her the moment he'd arrived, not out of attraction but out of habit. In his line of work, you cataloged everyone. Threats, witnesses, variables. Amy was the latter, someone moving through a space he needed to control, even if she didn't know it. She approached his table now, concern flickering across her features as she noticed his untouched meal. "Is everything okay with your steak, sir? I can have the kitchen." "It's fine." His voice was low, quiet, carrying the kind of weight that ended conversations. Amy hesitated, then nodded, professional smile returning. "Just let me know if you need anything." She turned away, and Nicholas returned to his surveillance of the room. The lawyers in the corner were getting louder, celebrating something. An older couple near the bar sat in comfortable silence. A businessman by the rain-streaked window stared at his phone. That's when Nicholas caught it. The businessman checked his watch, then checked it again 20 seconds later. Nobody checks their watch twice in 20 seconds, unless they're waiting for something specific, something timed. Nicholas's gaze shifted without his head moving. Another man at the bar, mid-30s, charcoal suit, nursing the same Manhattan he'd ordered 30 minutes ago. Phone out but screen dark. Eyes tracking movement patterns with the kind of calculated awareness Nicholas recognized instantly. Professionals. The kind who blended perfectly until you understood what perfect blending actually looked like. Recognition settled in Nicholas' chest like ice water. He knew an ambush when he saw one. The question was, who was the target? His eyes tracked the angles. The businessman by the window had positioned himself with a clear sightline across the dining room. The one at the bar had done the same from the opposite direction. Their focal points converged somewhere in the center of the restaurant. Nicholas followed the geometry. And then he saw it, the barely perceptible bulge under the window man's jacket, the way his shoulders had tensed in preparation, the micro-adjustments of someone about to draw a concealed weapon. Time slowed to a crawl. Amy emerged from the kitchen, balancing a tray of entrees. Her path would take her directly through the center of the dining room, the exact center where both men's sightlines intersected. She was 3 steps away from walking into an execution she didn't even know was coming. Nicholas understood in an instant. The target didn't matter. Amy was about to be in the wrong place at the wrong second, and in his world, that was the same as being guilty. Collateral damage, an acceptable loss to men who dealt in acceptable losses. He had maybe 5 seconds. 4. The man by the window shifted his weight forward. 3. Amy moved between tables, oblivious, smiling at a customer who thanked her. 2. Nicholas moved, not fast, not obviously, but with absolute precision. He stood as Amy passed his table, closing the distance in 2 smooth strides. His hand caught her arm, gentle but unyielding, and in one fluid motion, he pulled her against him, turning her back to the wall, his body shielding hers completely. His other hand came up to cover her mouth before she could scream. "Don't talk," he whispered against her ear, his voice barely audible but carrying the kind of authority that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to survival instinct. Amy's eyes went wide with shock and fear, her body rigid against his. The tray clattered to the floor, ceramic shattering, drawing attention from half the restaurant. But Nicholas didn't move, didn't release her. His dark eyes stayed fixed on the man by the window, his tattooed finger raised to his lips in a gesture that was both warning and command. Silence. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, and in that frozen moment, Amy Bell realized something that would change everything she thought she knew about the world. The man holding her wasn't trying to hurt her. He was listening, calculating, waiting. The man holding her was the only reason she was still breathing. Amy's heart slammed against her ribcage so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. The hand over her mouth was firm but not cruel, tattooed fingers that smelled faintly of expensive cologne and something darker she couldn't identify. The body pressed against hers radiated controlled tension, like a drawn bowstring held perfectly still. She wanted to scream, wanted to fight. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but something in the way he held her stopped those impulses cold. This wasn't aggression, this was protection. The thought made no sense. Through the corner of her vision, Amy could see the scattered remains of the entree she'd been carrying. Grilled salmon and roasted vegetables painted across the hardwood floor in an expensive mess. Her manager, Richard, would dock her pay for that. Another $50 she couldn't afford to lose. God. She was thinking about money while a stranger held her captive against a wall. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. Almost. Except nothing about this moment was funny. "Please don't move," the man whispered, his lips close enough to her ear that she felt the words more than heard them. "And don't make a sound. Not yet. Not yet." As if there would be a moment when sound became acceptable again. As if this was temporary. Amy's eyes darted around the dining room, searching for help. The lawyers in the corner were staring now, one of them half risen from his chair. The elderly couple near the bar looked alarmed. Richard was moving toward them from the kitchen, his face cycling through confusion and anger, but the man holding her, Nicholas, she remembered from the reservation list, ignored all of it. His attention was fixed on something across the room with an intensity that was almost frightening in its focus. She followed his gaze. The businessman by the window. Still seated, still staring at his phone. Nothing unusual except the way his other hand had disappeared inside his jacket. The way his jaw had tightened. The way he'd gone absolutely, unnaturally still. Amy felt Nicholas's body shift slightly, angling to keep himself between her and that window. Between her and whatever he was seeing that she couldn't. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to release my employee." Richard's voice cut through the tension, authoritative but uncertain. "Get down." Nicholas's voice was quiet but carried enough command that Richard actually flinched. "Everyone, get down, now." Nobody moved. The restaurant had gone silent except for the rain, which seemed to pound harder against the windows, as if nature itself sensed the wrongness in the room. Amy's mind raced. This man, this tattooed stranger in the expensive suit who'd been sitting alone all evening, barely touching his meal, watching everything with those dark, calculating eyes, had grabbed her, covered her mouth, pressed her against the wall. And somehow, impossibly, she didn't think he was the danger. The realization crashed through her with dizzying clarity. He'd seen something she'd walked right past without noticing. Something that had made him move without hesitation, without concern for how it looked or what consequences might follow. Men who moved like that had practice. Amy's childhood had been spent in neighborhoods where you learned to recognize danger by its walk, its posture, its eyes. Her father had worked construction until an injury left him disabled. Her mother had cleaned houses until arthritis made it impossible. They'd taught her to be observant, to trust her instincts, to understand that not all danger announced itself with violence. Sometimes danger wore expensive suits and sat quietly in corners, watching. But sometimes, so did the men who fought it. The thought should have terrified her more. Instead, it steadied something inside her chest. She stopped struggling. Nicholas felt the change immediately, the way her body lost its rigid panic, and found a different kind of stillness, understanding, maybe, or at least acceptance that whatever was happening, fighting him wasn't the answer. His hand remained over her mouth, but his grip loosened fractionally, a gesture of trust offered and received. "There are 2 men," he murmured, voice barely audible. "One by the window, one at the bar. They've been watching movement patterns for the last 20 minutes. You walked right through their sightline." Amy's eyes went wide above his hand. "When I let you go," Nicholas continued, his tone precise and controlled, "you're going to walk calmly toward the kitchen. You're not going to run. You're not going to look at either of them. You're going to move like nothing is wrong. Do you understand?" She managed the smallest nod against his palm. "Good." He paused, then added quietly, "You work double shifts here, don't you? Tuesdays and Thursdays too?" Another small nod. How did he know that? "You're always polite, even to the difficult customers, the ones who snap their fingers and complain about everything." His voice carried something that might have been approval. "That takes strength, real strength. Not many people have it." Amy felt tears prick at her eyes. Not from fear, though God knew she had every reason to be afraid, but from the strange, unexpected kindness in that observation. This man, whoever he was, had seen her. Not just tonight, but other nights. He'd watched her navigate rude businessmen and entitled lawyers, had witnessed her forcing smiles through exhaustion, and somehow, in this moment of absolute chaos, he'd chosen to tell her that it mattered. "I need you to use that strength now," Nicholas said, "because in about 10 seconds, I'm going to create a distraction, and you're going to walk away from this table like nothing in the world is wrong. Can you do that, Amy?" The sound of her name and his voice sent a strange jolt through her system. He'd remembered. Of course he'd remembered. Men like this remembered everything. "I'm going to take my hand away," he whispered. "Nod if you're ready." Amy took a breath through her nose, thought about her apartment with its overdue rent notice, her mother's medical bills, her little sister's college fund that she contributed to every paycheck, $50 at a time, her dreams of opening a small cafe someday, somewhere with better lighting and kinder customers, all the reasons she couldn't afford to die tonight. She nodded. Nicholas's hand left her mouth, and the world exploded into motion. Nicholas's hand left Amy's mouth, but before she could draw a full breath, everything happened at once. The wine glass on his table, the one he'd never touched, tipped over. Not accidentally, deliberately. Red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth in a dramatic cascade, the glass rolling off the edge and shattering against the hardwood floor with a sound that cut through the restaurant like a gunshot. Every head in the dining room turned toward the noise, except 2. The businessman by the window and the man at the bar both held their positions for a fraction of a second too long, their attention fixed on the space where Amy should have been standing, where she would have been standing if Nicholas hadn't moved. That fraction of a second told Nicholas everything he needed to know. "Kitchen, now!" The command was so quiet only Amy could hear it, but the urgency in his tone sent her moving on pure instinct. She took one step, then another. Her legs felt disconnected from her body, operating on autopilot while her mind struggled to process what was happening. The faces of other diners blurred as she passed, concern, confusion, curiosity, all of it distant and meaningless. Behind her, she heard Nicholas's voice rise slightly, apologetic. "My apologies. Clumsy evening." The performance was perfect. Embarrassed customer, accidental spill, nothing to see, but Amy could feel the lie of it in her bones. She pushed through the kitchen door, and the sounds of the dining room cut off, replaced by the clatter of pots and the hiss of grills. The kitchen staff looked up. Miguel at the prep station, Sophia working sauté, Richard already moving toward her with that expression that meant he was about to yell about the dropped entrees. "I need..." Amy's voice came out wrong, strangled. She tried again. "I need a minute." "You need to get back out there," Richard snapped. "Table 7 has been waiting 15 minutes for..." "Richard." Sophia's voice cut through his complaint, sharp and concerned. "Look at her." Amy realized her hands were shaking. Not just trembling, actually shaking. Fingers splayed wide like she was trying to hold on to something that kept slipping away. "I just need a minute," she repeated, and this time her voice broke completely. Sophia was beside her immediately, strong hands guiding her toward the small break area in the back. "Sit, breathe. Miguel, get her water." Amy sank onto the plastic chair, her body finally catching up to what her mind had been processing. Someone had been about to what? Shoot? Attack? She didn't even know. But Nicholas had known. Had seen it coming. Had grabbed her and shielded her and somehow, impossibly, had made her feel safer in that moment than she'd felt in months, which made absolutely no sense. Did that customer hurt you? Sophia's voice was tight with protective anger. Because if he touched you... No, Amy shook her head quickly. No, he was trying to help, I think. The words sounded insane even as she said them. Miguel handed her a glass of water, and Amy took it with both hands to hide the shaking. She brought it to her lips but couldn't drink. Her throat had closed up, her body locked in some kind of delayed shock response. Through the small window in the kitchen door, she could see a slice of the dining room. Nicholas had returned to his table, was speaking with Richard now, gesturing calmly at the spilled wine. Playing his role perfectly, the businessman by the window was standing, pulling bills from his wallet. The one at the bar had disappeared entirely. Leaving, both of them leaving. Whatever had been about to happen had somehow stopped. I'm calling the police, Richard announced, pushing back through the kitchen door. That man assaulted you in front of witnesses. No, the word came out sharper than Amy intended. No police, please. Richard stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. Amy, he grabbed you. He knocked an entire tray out of your hands. That's assault. That's not what happened. Amy stood, forcing her legs to support her weight. I tripped. He steadied me. The tray was already falling. The lie tasted wrong in her mouth, but something deeper than logic told her it was the right one. That whatever Nicholas had done, whatever he'd seen, involving the police would make things worse, not better. Richard's expression cycled between disbelief and frustration. You expect me to believe? Yes. Amy met his eyes, finding steel in herself she didn't know existed. Because that's what happened. I was clumsy. He helped. End of story. Sophia was looking at her with an expression that said she knew there was more to it, but to Amy's relief, she didn't push. She's had a shock. Let her collect herself. Richard threw up his hands. Fine. But you're covering that tray out of your tips, and table 7 is still waiting. He stalked back toward the dining room, leaving Amy and Sophia in tense silence. What really happened out there? Sophia asked quietly. Amy opened her mouth, but nothing came out. How could she explain something she didn't understand herself? That a stranger had grabbed her, silenced her, held her against a wall and somehow, in doing so, had saved her life. That she'd felt safer in the arms of a dangerous man than she'd felt in months of serving normal customers? I don't know, she finally whispered. I really don't know. But that wasn't entirely true. She knew that Nicholas DeAngelis wasn't just some businessman having a quiet dinner. She knew those tattoos told stories written in violence. She knew the way he'd moved precise, controlled, absolutely certain came from practice in situations most people never survived. She knew that when he'd whispered, "Don't talk," it hadn't been a threat. It had been salvation. Take 5 minutes, Sophia said, squeezing her shoulder. Then we need you back out there. Thursday night, remember? Tips are good. Amy nodded numbly. Tips, bills, rent, the mundane mathematics of survival that had defined her life for so long. Except tonight, survival had meant something different. Tonight, survival had meant a stranger's hand over her mouth and a whispered command that had kept her breathing. She stood, smoothed her hair, checked her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator. Her face looked pale, eyes too wide, but functional, presentable. She could do this. She'd been doing it for years, smiling through exhaustion, pushing through pain, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. But as Amy pushed back through the kitchen door into the dining room, her eyes found Nicholas's table immediately. He was gone. The corner table sat empty, except for cash laid precisely on the tablecloth enough to cover his untouched meal 3 times over. And underneath the bills, barely visible, a small card with a single handwritten line. You're safe now. Stay that way. Nicholas moved through the rain-soaked streets, with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years disappearing into urban landscapes. His black suit was already soaked, water streaming down his face and neck, but he didn't quicken his pace. Hurrying drew attention. Panic left traces, and right now, he needed to be a ghost. 3 blocks from Carlisle Steakhouse, he ducked into the recessed doorway of a closed bookstore and pulled out his phone. The screen illuminated his face in harsh blue light as he pulled up the security feed he'd hacked into before entering the restaurant. Standard practice. Always know your exits. Always have eyes you control. He rewound the footage, watching from angles the diners would never see. There, the businessman by the window, arriving 20 minutes before Nicholas, positioning himself with military precision, and there the one at the bar, entering separately but coordinating movements with practiced synchronization. Professionals. Contract killers, most likely. The kind who charged 6 figures and didn't miss. Nicholas's jaw tightened as he watched Amy's path through the dining room on the timestamp, saw how perfectly her route intersected with their sightlines, saw the moment the window man's hand moved toward his jacket. He'd been right. Seconds away from execution. But as he studied the footage more carefully, something didn't add up. The shooter's focus wasn't on him. Their attention had tracked multiple targets throughout the evening, but kept returning to one specific area, table 12, where a man in his 50s sat with 2 younger associates, discussing something over expensive scotch. Nicholas zoomed in on the man's face and felt ice settle in his stomach. Julian Torres, federal prosecutor, decorated career built on taking down organized crime, currently preparing the biggest RICO case the city had seen in 20 years, one that threatened to dismantle 3 major families, including people Nicholas had known his entire life, including people who'd want Torres dead. Damn it, Nicholas muttered into the rain. The assassination wasn't about territory or revenge or any of the usual calculations that governed his world. It was about silencing a man who threatened the entire ecosystem. And Amy innocent, exhausted Amy who worked double shifts and smiled through abuse from entitled customers, would have been collateral damage. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong 4 feet of space in a room full of killers. Nicholas's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but he recognized the pattern. Encrypted burner, routed through 3 proxies. Did you interfere? His thumb hovered over the screen. Whoever sent this knew he'd been at Carlisle tonight, knew something had gone wrong with the hit, and was asking if he'd been the reason. Nicholas deleted the message without responding and pulled the battery from his phone. Questions like that didn't deserve answers. They deserved silence and distance. He'd built his reputation on 2 principles: keep your word and stay out of other people's business. Tonight he'd violated the second one. That violation would have consequences. Men in his world didn't forgive interference, even with good intentions, especially with good intentions. The rain intensified, turning from steady downpour to deluge. Nicholas stepped out of the doorway and continued walking, letting the water wash away any trace of where he'd been. His mind worked through probabilities and consequences with the cold efficiency that had kept him alive this long. The hit had failed. Torres was still breathing, probably didn't even know how close he'd come to dying. The shooters had scattered when their window closed, literally and figuratively. They'd report back to whoever contracted them. Questions would be asked. Security footage would be reviewed. And someone would notice Nicholas DeAngelis sitting in the corner, perfectly positioned to see everything, which meant he'd just painted a target on his own back. Worth it, he said aloud to the empty street, and meant it. Because the alternative, walking away, letting Amy die to maintain his reputation, wasn't something he could live with. He'd made compromises before, bent his morality into shapes that let him sleep at night, but there were lines even he wouldn't cross. Innocent people dying for convenience was one of them. Nicholas thought about his father, about the stories the old man used to tell before the violence consumed him completely. Stories about honor and codes and the difference between being dangerous and being cruel. His father had believed those stories once, had tried to live by them, until the family pulled him deeper, until honor became a luxury they couldn't afford, until the only story that mattered was survival. His father had died 6 years ago, executed in his own home by people he'd called friends. The official story was a heart attack, but Nicholas had found the truth in the details no one else bothered to look for. The empty pill bottles, the coroner's report that didn't quite match, the insurance payout that came too quickly. They'd made it look natural because his father had earned that much respect, but they'd still killed him. Nicholas had learned 2 things from his father's death: trust no one completely, and choose your moments to act with absolute certainty. Tonight had been one of those moments. Not calculated, not strategic, just necessary. He reached his car, a nondescript sedan parked 4 blocks away, registered under a shell company, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. Water dripped from his hair onto the leather, but he didn't move to wipe it away. His mind kept returning to Amy's face when he'd covered her mouth. The initial terror, then the shift, that moment when fear transformed into something else. Understanding, maybe, or trust. She'd stopped fighting him, had listened, had walked away when he told her to. That kind of composure under pressure was rare. Most people froze or panicked. Amy had done neither. She'd processed, adapted, survived. Nicholas found himself hoping she'd stay that smart, stay that aware. Because tonight had revealed something dangerous. Amy Bell had walked through a war zone without knowing it, and in his world, ignorance was the most dangerous position of all. His phone, still disassembled on the passenger seat, wouldn't stay quiet for long. Eventually, he'd have to answer for tonight. Would have to explain why he'd interfered with business that wasn't his. But for now, sitting in the rain-drummed silence of his car, Nicholas let himself feel something he hadn't felt in years. The certainty that he'd made the right choice. Consequences be damned. Even if it cost him everything. Especially if it cost him everything. Because some things were worth the price. Amy's shift ended at midnight, but she stayed until 1, helping Sophia close down the kitchen and reset the dining room for tomorrow. Anything to avoid going home. Anything to delay the moment when she'd be alone with her thoughts, and the adrenaline would finally crash. Her hands had stopped shaking an hour ago, replaced by a strange numbness that felt almost worse. Like her body had used up its entire capacity for fear and now had nothing left to feel. The card Nicholas had left sat folded in her pocket. She'd touched it 17 times since finding it, fingers tracing the edges, confirming it was real. "You're safe now. Stay that way." 5 words that had rearranged her entire understanding of the world. "You sure you're okay to walk home?" Sophia asked, untying her apron. "I can give you a ride. I'm fine," Amy lied. "It's only 6 blocks. Sophia studied her with the expression of someone who'd raised 3 daughters and knew when she was being handled. "That man tonight, the one who grabbed you, you know him?" "No, but you protected him." It wasn't a question. Amy met Sophia's eyes and saw understanding there, the kind that came from lived experience in neighborhoods where calling the police sometimes made things worse instead of better. "I don't know what happened tonight," Amy said carefully. "But I don't think involving police would help." Sophia nodded slowly. "My brother, he got mixed up with some people when he was young. Bad people. He tried to get out, tried to do the right thing, and they killed him for it." She paused, choosing her words. "Sometimes the dangerous men are the ones who protect you. And sometimes the safe ones are the ones you should fear. You understand?" Amy thought about Nicholas's tattooed hands, the precision of his movements, the absolute certainty in his whispered command. "I think so." "Good." Sophia squeezed her shoulder. "Trust your instincts. They kept you alive tonight." After Sophia left, Amy stood alone in the empty dining room. The corner table where Nicholas had sat was reset fresh tablecloth, new wine glass, silverware precisely arranged, no trace of what had happened. No evidence of the moment her life had tilted sideways. She walked over and stood where he'd been sitting, trying to see the room from his angle. He'd chosen this table deliberately, back to the wall, full view of both entrances, perfect sightlines to every table in the restaurant. Amy turned slowly, following the geometry of his vision. The window where the businessman had sat, the bar where the other man had positioned himself, the path she'd walked between them, and suddenly she saw it, the triangle of death she'd moved through without knowing. How perfectly her route had intersected with their angles. How exposed she'd been. Her stomach turned. She'd been walking through a shooting gallery, smiling and serving food, completely oblivious to the fact that she was seconds from dying. Amy sank into Nicholas's chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. This was what he'd seen. This geometry of violence that existed beneath the surface of normal life. This invisible architecture of danger that people like her never noticed until it was too late. Except Nicholas had noticed, had seen it developing, had moved to stop it without hesitation, without concern for how it looked or what it cost him. Why? She pulled the card from her pocket and studied it again, looking for answers in the precise handwriting. Strong strokes, confident, the writing of someone who didn't second-guess their decisions. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. "Did you remember to pay the electric bill?" The mundane question felt surreal after everything, like the universe insisting that rent and utilities still mattered even when you'd just survived an assassination attempt you hadn't known was happening. Amy typed back, "Yes, Mama, paid on Tuesday." Another message appeared. "Your sister got an A on her chemistry test. She wanted you to know." Despite everything, Amy smiled. Her little sister, Daniela, 16 and brilliant, and determined to be the first in their family to graduate college. The reason Amy worked double shifts, the reason she'd stayed in this city instead of running somewhere cheaper, easier. "Tell her I'm proud of her," Amy wrote back. She pocketed her phone and stood, forcing herself to move. She needed to go home, needed sleep, needed to process tonight in whatever way her mind would allow. But as she walked toward the exit, her eyes caught on something that stopped her cold. The security camera in the corner, the one that recorded everything. Richard would review that footage tomorrow. Would see Nicholas grab her, see her drop the tray, see the whole incident that she'd lied about, and he'd have questions she couldn't answer. Amy's heart started racing again. She thought about Sophia's brother, about dangerous men and safe ones, about the invisible wars that happened in plain sight, and then she made a decision. The security office was barely bigger than a closet, tucked behind the kitchen. Richard kept it locked, but Amy knew where he hid the spare key inside a fake electrical outlet near the prep station. She'd seen him retrieve it a dozen times when servers needed to review footage after customer complaints. Her hands were shaking again as she unlocked the door. The monitor showed a grid of camera feeds: dining room, bar, kitchen, front entrance. Amy found the controls, rewound to 8:47 p.m., and watched herself on screen. There she was, carrying the tray, walking toward Nicholas's table. And then, he moved so fast the camera barely caught it. One frame she was walking, the next she was against the wall, his hand over her mouth, his body shielding hers. Amy watched it 3 times, looking for details she'd missed while living through it. The way his eyes never left the window. The way his body angled to protect her completely. The moment the businessman by the window stood abruptly, his plan disrupted. And then she watched Nicholas create his distraction, the wine glass tipping with such perfect timing it seemed accidental. The way every head in the restaurant turned except the 2 men who'd been hunting. It was beautiful, in a terrible way. A violent ballet performed with such precision that no one noticed it was happening. Amy understood something then that made her chest tighten. Nicholas hadn't just saved her life. He'd done it without firing a shot, without throwing a punch, without any of the violence his appearance promised. He'd used silence and timing and perfect control. That was more terrifying than any gun. Because it meant he could have done anything. Could have killed those men, killed everyone in the restaurant if he'd wanted. But he'd chosen restraint instead. Amy deleted the footage. All of it. 7:30 p.m. to 9:15 p.m., erased completely. Then she locked the office, replaced the key, and walked out into the rain. The street was empty, slick with reflected neon. Amy stood under the awning, watching water stream off the edge. Somewhere in this city, Nicholas DeAngelis was dealing with consequences she couldn't imagine. Answering questions about why he'd interfered, possibly in danger because he'd chosen to protect a stranger, and Amy Bell was going home to pay bills and help her sister with homework. 2 lives that should never have intersected, but had, and nothing would ever be the same. Nicholas sat in the back room of a warehouse in the industrial district, watching 3 men who wanted him dead decide whether tonight was the night. They hadn't said it explicitly. Men in their position never did. But he could read it in the weight of the silence, in the way Dominic Russo kept his hand near his waistband, in how the youngest one, Tommy something, new to the family, wouldn't meet his eyes. "You want to explain what happened at Carlisle tonight?" Dominic asked, his voice carrying the deceptive calm of a man who'd ordered executions over breakfast. Nicholas kept his posture relaxed, hands visible on the metal table between them. Showing fear would be fatal, so would showing defiance. "A waitress was about to walk into crossfire," he said simply. "I moved her. That waitress wasn't your concern. Neither was the hit. But I was there. I saw it developing." Dominic's jaw tightened. "You compromised a $50,000 contract because of a girl you don't even know?" "I compromised nothing. Torres is still breathing, but that's because the shooters lost their window when I created a distraction. They could have adapted. They chose to abort, because you made them abort." Nicholas held Dominic's stare. "I made them think. There's a difference." The 3rd man, Carlo, Dominic's enforcer and the closest thing Nicholas had to a friend in this world, leaned back in his chair. "The contractors are pissed. They're saying you deliberately sabotaged the operation. The contractors are embarrassed that someone sitting 30 feet away read their entire setup before they could execute." Nicholas kept his voice level. "That's a them problem, not a me problem." "It becomes your problem when they demand compensation," Dominic said. $50,000 for the failed hit, plus another $25,000 for damages to their reputation. $75,000. More than Nicholas kept liquid, enough to cripple him financially, which was exactly the point. This wasn't about money. It was about reminding him where he stood in the hierarchy. "I don't owe them compensation for their incompetence." Tommy shifted his weight, hand moving incrementally closer to his concealed weapon. Nicholas tracked the movement without looking directly at it. You owe what we say you owe, Dominic said quietly. That's how this works, Nick. You've been in this life long enough to understand that. Nicholas had been in this life since he was 17, 12 years of navigating the impossible mathematics of loyalty and survival, of serving men who demanded everything and gave nothing, of watching good people die because they trusted the wrong promise. He understood perfectly. I could have let her die, Nicholas said. And for the first time, emotion crept into his voice. Is that what you wanted? An innocent woman's death on my conscience so some overpriced contractors could maintain their perfect record? I wanted you to mind your own business, Dominic snapped, like you've done for 12 years without incident. But tonight you decided to play hero, and now we have a problem. The problem is Torres is still alive, Carlo interjected, his tone more measured than Dominic's. The girl's irrelevant, but the target survived, which means the people who paid for that hit are going to come looking for answers, and those people make us look like amateurs. Nicholas felt the trap closing. The real issue wasn't Amy. It was never Amy. It was that his interference had left a federal prosecutor alive who should be dead, and someone powerful wanted to know why. So what happens now? Nicholas asked. Dominic studied him for a long moment. Now you fix it. The words landed like a death sentence. You want me to finish the hit. I want you to clean up your mess. Torres needs to disappear. Quietly, before the people who contracted this decide we're unreliable. Nicholas's mind raced through possibilities, all of them ending in blood he didn't want on his hands. Julian Torres was a true believer, the kind of prosecutor who actually thought he could reform the system from inside. Naive, maybe, but not evil, not deserving of execution. And if I refuse? Tommy's hand finally found his weapon, though he didn't draw it yet. Dominic's expression didn't change, which was somehow more threatening than anger would have been. Then we have a different problem to solve, Dominic said softly. And you become the mess that needs cleaning. The math was simple. Kill Torres or be killed himself. Violate the one principle he'd maintained throughout his years in this life, never harm innocence or die defending it. Some choices weren't really choices at all. I need time, Nicholas said. Torres will be protected now. The hit attempt probably triggered federal security protocols. I can't just walk up and shoot him. It was a stall, and everyone in the room knew it. But it was also logical, which gave Dominic room to accept it without losing face. You have 48 hours, Dominic said. After that, we assume you've chosen your side. The meeting ended with handshakes that felt like contracts written in blood. Nicholas walked out of the warehouse into the pre-dawn darkness, his body moving on autopilot while his mind worked through impossible scenarios. He couldn't kill Torres. Wouldn't. The man was guilty of nothing except believing the law mattered. But refusing meant his own execution. Dominic wasn't bluffing. In this world, defiance was terminal. Nicholas reached his car and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glistening under streetlights. False cleanliness. Temporary peace. His phone, reassembled now, buzzed with a message from a number he didn't recognize. The waitress deleted the security footage. Thought you should know. Nicholas stared at the screen, something shifting in his chest. Amy had protected him, had destroyed evidence that could have kept her safe from any blowback. She'd made herself complicit by erasing that footage, had chosen his safety over her own. Why? She didn't know him. Didn't owe him anything. Should have been terrified of him. Instead, she'd committed a crime to keep him anonymous. Nicholas thought about the way she'd stopped struggling when she'd understood he wasn't the threat. The way she'd looked at him in that moment, not with fear, but with something closer to recognition, like she'd seen past the tattoos and the violence, and recognized something human underneath. No one had looked at him like that in years. He started the engine and pulled into the empty street. No destination in mind. Just movement. Just the illusion of choice when all his choices had been stripped away. 48 hours to kill a man who didn't deserve it, or die defending a principle no one else believed in. The most powerful thing a dangerous man can do, his father used to say, is choose when to stop. Nicholas had stopped tonight at Carlisle, had chosen restraint over violence, and now that choice was going to kill him. Unless he found a third option no one else could see. Amy didn't expect to see him again. She'd convinced herself that Nicholas De Angelis was a ghost, someone who'd appeared in her life for one impossible moment and then vanished back into whatever shadows produced men like him. The card in her pocket had become a talisman she touched obsessively, proof that it had all been real. So when she walked out of Carlisle's Steakhouse at the end of her Friday shift and found him leaning against the brick wall across the street, her heart stopped. He looked different in the daylight that was just beginning to break through the dawn. Still dangerous, that hadn't changed. But tired. The kind of exhaustion that lived in bones and couldn't be fixed with sleep. His black suit was wrinkled, like he'd been wearing it for 24 hours straight. Rain had started again. Light mist that made the street shimmer. Their eyes met across the distance. Nicholas straightened, and for a moment neither of them moved. Amy felt her pulse hammering in her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get back inside the restaurant, to put distance between herself and whatever he represented. Instead, she crossed the street toward him. "You shouldn't be here," she said when she was close enough for conversation. "I know." His voice was rough, like he'd been using it too much, or not at all. "But I needed to make sure you were okay." "I deleted the footage," Amy said, unsure why that was the first thing out of her mouth. "From the security cameras, all of it." Something flickered across Nicholas's face, surprise, maybe, or concern. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Amy pulled her jacket tighter against the mist. "Because whatever happened last night, you saved my life, and I'm not going to repay that by letting you end up on some police report." Nicholas studied her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "You don't know what you're protecting me from. I know you're in trouble because of me, not because of you. Because of a choice I made." He paused, then added quietly, "A choice I'd make again." The words settled between them, heavy with implication. Amy felt something shift in her chest, some wall she'd built starting to crack. "Who were they?" she asked. "Those men last night. What were they going to do?" Nicholas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Rain collected on his shoulders, darkening the fabric of his suit. Finally, he said, "They were hired to kill someone. A federal prosecutor who's been building a case against organized crime. You were going to be in the way." The casual way he said it, organized crime, sent ice through Amy's veins. This wasn't abstract danger anymore. This was real, concrete, the kind of violence that made headlines. "And you?" she whispered. "Are you part of that? The organized crime?" Nicholas met her eyes without flinching. Yes, the honesty was somehow more frightening than a lie would have been. No excuses, no justification, just the truth, delivered like a fact of nature. Amy should have run, should have screamed, should have done anything except stand there in the mist, looking at a man who'd just admitted to being a criminal, and feeling safer than she'd felt in months. "Why did you save me?" she asked. "If you're one of them, why did you care about a random waitress?" "Because you're not random." Nicholas's jaw tightened. "Because I've watched you work that restaurant for 6 months, watched you smile through harassment and exhaustion, watched you give more kindness to strangers than they deserve, because you're everything this world isn't, and I couldn't let you die for being in the wrong place." 6 months. He'd been watching her for 6 months. The revelation should have terrified her. Instead, it explained things she hadn't consciously noticed, the way he always requested her section, the generous tips that had helped her make rent during slow weeks, the quiet presence that had somehow felt protective, even before she'd understood why. "I'm in trouble now," Nicholas continued, his voice low and controlled, "because I interfered with business that wasn't mine, because I put your life ahead of my reputation, and in my world that's unforgivable." "What kind of trouble?" He hesitated, and Amy saw the calculation behind his eyes, how much to tell her, how much honesty she could handle. "Finally," he said, "the kind that ends with someone dead. Either the prosecutor or me. I have 48 hours to decide which." The words punched through her chest. "They're making you kill him? The prosecutor? Or refuse and face consequences?" Amy felt dizzy. This was real. Not a movie, not a story. A real man standing in front of her, telling her he had 2 days to live unless he murdered someone. "There has to be another option," she said desperately. "Some way out." "There isn't. Not in this world. You make your choices and you live with them. Or you don't live at all. Then leave." The words burst out before Amy could stop them. "Just leave. Get out of the city. Start over somewhere they can't find you." Nicholas smiled, but it was the saddest expression Amy had ever seen. "They can always find you. And running just means everyone you care about becomes leverage. Your mother in the apartment on 7th Street, your sister Daniela at Lincoln High, Sophia who drives you home on late nights." Amy's blood turned to ice. "How do you—" "Because I pay attention. Because knowing things keeps people alive in my world." His expression hardened. "Which is why you need to forget you ever saw me. Forget last night happened. Go back to your life and stay as far from this as possible." "I can't just forget. You have to." Nicholas took a step closer, and Amy saw the desperation behind his control. "Because if they think you matter to me, if they think you're leverage, they'll use you, and I can't protect you from that. I can barely protect myself." Tears burned Amy's eyes. "So that's it? You save my life and then disappear? That's how you stay alive. That's how Daniela gets to graduate. That's how your mother gets her medical treatments. That's how you open that cafe you dream about." His voice softened. "You deserve all of that, Amy. You deserve a life that doesn't include men like me. But, please." The word came out broken, stripped of all the control he usually carried. "Please just let me have done one good thing. Let me have saved you completely. Not halfway. Not with conditions. Just, completely." Amy realized she was crying. "What are you going to do?" Nicholas stepped back, creating distance again. "What I should have done 12 years ago. Make a choice I can live with, even if I don't live long. Nicholas, go home, Amy. Be safe. Be happy. Forget the dangerous man who grabbed you in a restaurant." He turned and started walking away, his silhouette dissolving into the misty dawn. Amy stood frozen, watching him disappear. Her mind screamed at her to chase him, to stop him, to do something, but her body wouldn't move. Because she understood now, this was mercy. This was him protecting her the only way he knew how, by leaving, by choosing her safety over everything else, even over himself. The street was empty now. Just Amy and the rain and the echo of words she'd never forget. She touched the card in her pocket one last time. "You're safe now. Stay that way." And then she walked home, carrying the weight of a man who'd chosen to die so she could live. Nicholas drove for 3 hours before he admitted to himself that he had nowhere to go. The highway stretched empty in both directions, gray asphalt bleeding into gray sky. He'd passed the city limits an hour ago, past the point where Dominic's reach felt immediate and suffocating. But distance was an illusion. In this world, you were never far enough away. His phone had been buzzing steadily for the last 20 minutes. He didn't need to check it to know what the messages said. Time was running out. Decisions needed to be made. Blood needed to be spilled. Instead, he pulled off at a rest stop and sat in the parking lot, watching families load and unload minivans. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, chased her brother around their car while their mother tried to wrangle them both. Normal people. Normal problems. Nicholas wondered what that felt like. His father used to tell him there were 2 types of men in their world: those who pretended they had no choice, and those who admitted they'd chosen this life knowing exactly what it cost. Nicholas had always tried to be the second type, honest about what he was, accepting of consequences. But sitting here, watching that little girl laugh, he realized his father had been wrong. There was a third type. Men who'd made their choices so long ago they'd forgotten there had ever been alternatives. Nicholas pulled out his phone. 17 missed calls, 9 text messages, all from numbers in Dominic's network, and one from an unknown contact, sent 10 minutes ago. "Torres is being moved to a safe house tonight. Courthouse to Federal Building, then north. 3-car convoy. Route attached." The message included precise details, timing, security protocols, vulnerable points in the route. Everything Nicholas would need to finish the job Dominic had assigned him. Someone inside the federal system was feeding information to the family. Someone who believed Torres was worth more dead than alive. Someone who decided that justice was negotiable. Nicholas stared at the screen until the words blurred. He could do it. Wait along the route. Single shot through the windshield at the right intersection. Torres would be dead before his security team could react. Clean. Professional. Exactly the kind of work Nicholas had built his reputation on. Except he'd never killed anyone who didn't deserve it. And Julian Torres's only crime was believing the system could be fixed from inside. Nicholas deleted the message. Then he opened his contacts and found a number he hadn't called in 4 years. His finger hovered over it for 30 seconds before he pressed dial. The line rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered. "I wondered when you'd call. Catherine." Nicholas closed his eyes. "I need help." "You need an exit. There's a difference." Catherine Reeves had been the family's attorney for 20 years before she'd walked away, traded criminal defense for corporate law, escaped with her life and her conscience mostly intact. She was one of the few people who'd managed to leave and survive. "Can you do it?" Nicholas asked. "Get me out? Out of the city, yes. Out of the life?" She paused. "That depends on how badly they want you dead. Pretty badly. Then we're talking witness protection, federal cooperation, Full testimony about family operations. Her voice hardened. You ready to burn it all down, Nick? Because that's the only exit that works. Nicholas thought about Dominic, about Carlo, who'd been his friend before loyalty made friendship impossible, about a dozen other men he'd known since childhood, men who'd trusted him, relied on him, treated him like family even when family meant nothing. Burning them would mean destroying lives, creating power vacuums, triggering wars that would kill people on both sides, but staying meant killing Torres. Or dying himself. I can't testify, Nicholas said quietly. I can't be the reason other people die. Then you're choosing your own death. Catherine's tone held no judgment. You understand that? I understand. There's no third option here, Nick. Either you disappear into federal protection and help them dismantle the families, or you go back and play by their rules. Those are your choices. What if I just run? Take what money I have and disappear? They'll find you. Might take months, might take years, but they'll find you. And when they do, it won't be quick. She softened slightly. You're better than this life, Nick. You always have been. But better doesn't matter if you're dead. Nicholas watched the little girl climb back into her family's minivan, still laughing. Her mother buckled her in with the practiced efficiency of routine love. I saved someone, he said suddenly, 2 nights ago. A waitress who was about to die for being in the wrong place. I grabbed her, covered her mouth, stopped her from walking into crossfire. And for maybe 10 seconds, she looked at me like I was something other than what I am. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Did it feel good? It felt right. Then maybe that's your answer. Her voice was gentle now. Maybe the man who can save a stranger is worth saving too. Nicholas ended the call without responding. He sat in the parking lot for another 20 minutes, watching families come and go, until his phone buzzed again. Dominic, text message, 2 words, time's up. Nicholas started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, not north toward Torres's route, not south toward the border and fantasy escapes, east, back toward the city, back toward consequences, because Catherine was right. There were only 2 options, burn everything or accept his fate. But she was also wrong. There was always a third option. You just had to be willing to pay for it yourself. Nicholas drove through the morning light, the city skyline growing larger on the horizon. His hands were steady on the wheel. His mind was clear. He'd made his choice 12 years ago when he'd joined this life. Tonight, he'd make his last one. The man who'd walked away from Amy Bell to protect her was the same man driving back to face consequences for that protection. And if that meant dying for doing one good thing, then maybe that was the only honest ending a man like him deserved. Amy went through the motions of living like a woman underwater, everything muffled, distant, requiring twice the effort it should. She served tables at Carlisle, smiled at customers, balanced trays, made change. All the mechanical actions that had defined her life for 3 years, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. Friday night she'd stood in the rain and watched Nicholas walk away. Saturday she'd worked a double shift, expecting every dark-suited man who entered to be him. Sunday she'd barely slept, her dreams full of tattooed hands and whispered commands and the weight of choices she didn't understand. Now it was Monday evening, and she was refilling water glasses at table 9 while her thoughts spiraled through impossible scenarios. 48 hours, he'd said. That deadline had passed yesterday. Whatever choice Nicholas had made, whatever consequences he'd faced, they were already in motion. And Amy had no way of knowing if he was alive or dead. Miss, could we get more bread? Amy blinked, focusing on the businessman in front of her. Of course, right away. She walked toward the kitchen on autopilot, her body navigating the familiar path while her mind stayed trapped in that dawn conversation. The desperation in Nicholas's voice when he'd said please, the way he'd looked at her like she represented something he'd lost or never had, the certainty in his tone when he'd accepted his own death. You okay? Sophia asked, intercepting her near the prep station. You've been off all weekend. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar. Sophia studied her with concerned eyes. This is about that man, the one from Thursday. Amy wanted to deny it, wanted to smile and deflect and pretend everything was normal. Instead, she said, he's going to die because he saved me. The words came out broken. Sophia pulled her into the walk-in cooler where they could talk privately, away from the kitchen chaos. Tell me, Sophia commanded. So Amy did. Not everything, she didn't know everything, but enough. The assassination attempt, Nicholas's interference, the 48-hour ultimatum, the impossible choice between killing an innocent man or dying himself. When she finished, Sophia was quiet for a long moment. Men like that, she finally said. They don't usually save people. They usually are the thing people need saving from. I know, but he saved you anyway. Yes. Sophia shook her head slowly. My brother, the one I told you about, he tried to leave the life. Tried to be better. And they killed him for it because better was dangerous. Better meant questioning. Better meant other people might start thinking they had choices too. Amy felt tears burning behind her eyes. So there's no way out? There's always a way out. You just don't usually survive it. Sophia squeezed Amy's hand. I'm sorry, Mija. I'm sorry that good man is paying for being good. They returned to work, and Amy pushed through the rest of her shift with mechanical precision. But her mind wouldn't stop calculating, wouldn't stop searching for angles, for possibilities, for some action she could take that would matter. At midnight, she stood outside the restaurant in the exact spot where she'd last seen Nicholas. The street was empty. The rain had stopped. Everything looked normal, but nothing would ever be normal again. Amy pulled out her phone and did something reckless. She searched for news about federal prosecutors, about organized crime, about anything that might tell her if Julian Torres was still alive, if Nicholas had refused, if the world had continued turning or stopped completely. She found an article from 6 hours ago. Federal prosecutor Julian Torres survives second assassination attempt. Amy's heart stopped. The article was sparse on details. Torres had been in a secure convoy when an unknown assailant had fired shots at his vehicle. Security had returned fire. The attacker had fled. No one was killed, but someone had tried. Again. And if Nicholas had been that someone, he'd failed. Which meant Amy's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Text message. Stop looking. It's over. You're safe. Her hands shook as she typed back. Are you alive? 3 minutes passed. No response. Then, does it matter? Yes, Amy typed. It matters. Another long pause. Go home, Amy. Forget dangerous men. She stared at the screen, at the echo of words he'd said to her face. This was him. Alive. Still breathing. But for how long? I can't forget, she wrote. I won't. The response came faster this time. Then you're braver than I am. Or more foolish. Probably both. Amy found herself smiling despite everything. Where are you? Somewhere I can't come back from. Federal protection? A longer pause. Then, something like that. It's complicated. Did you kill him? Torres? No. And I never will. Some lines I won't cross, even if it costs everything. Tears streamed down Amy's face now, hot and unchecked. This man, this criminal, this dangerous person she barely knew, had chosen death over compromise, had chosen principle over survival. What happens now? She typed. Now I testify. Help the feds dismantle everything. Betray everyone who ever trusted me. Spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, knowing I'm a dead man walking. But you'll be alive. Amy wrote desperately. Will I? Or will I just be breathing? The question hung between them, unanswerable. I deleted the footage, Amy wrote, needing him to know. I protected you. I know. And that might have saved my life more than anything else. No evidence of my interference. No proof I was involved. You gave me the chance to disappear. Then why come back? Another pause, the longest yet. Because I needed to know you understood. That it mattered. That saving you meant something beyond just survival. Amy's chest ached with feelings she couldn't name. Thank you, she typed. For everything. Thank you for reminding me what I was before this life consumed me. For looking at me like I was human. No one's done that in years. The screen showed he was typing, then stopped, then started again. Be safe, Amy Bell. Be happy. Open that cafe. Help your sister graduate. Have the life I'll never get. Nicholas. But the connection went dead. Blocked number. No way to respond. Amy stood alone in the empty street, phone clutched in shaking hands, and understood that some goodbyes weren't meant to be fought. They were meant to be honored. So she went home, checked on her sleeping mother, texted Daniela good luck on tomorrow's test, paid the electric bill. Living the life Nicholas had died to protect, even though he was still breathing. The rain returned on Tuesday, steady and relentless, turning the city into a watercolor of blurred lights and gray shadows. Amy stood at the window of her apartment, watching it stream down the glass, and thought about silence. The silence of a man covering her mouth to save her life. The silence of deleted security footage. The silence of consequences accepted without complaint. Her phone sat on the counter, dark and quiet, No more messages from unknown numbers. No more glimpses into a world she'd never fully understand. Nicholas was gone. Not dead, she had to believe that, but gone in every way that mattered. Disappeared into federal protection or something like it. His old life erased. His identity rebuilt from nothing. He'd betrayed everyone to avoid becoming something worse than he already was. That took a kind of courage Amy was only beginning to comprehend. Her mother shuffled into the kitchen, tired, but smiling. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep." Amy turned from the window. "Want coffee?" "Always." Her mother settled into a chair with a grateful sigh. "Daniela says she got an A- on her chemistry exam. She's disappointed it wasn't an A." Amy smiled despite the heaviness in her chest. "Of course she is. She's brilliant and impossible." "She gets that from you." "I'm not brilliant." "No," her mother agreed. "But you're impossible in the best way. Impossible to defeat, impossible to break. You've carried this family on your back for years, mija, and never complained once." Amy poured coffee, hands steady despite the emotion rising in her throat. "Someone has to." "Yes. But that doesn't make it less extraordinary." Her mother accepted the mug with arthritic hands. "You deserve rest, deserve happiness." "I'm happy," Amy lied. Her mother's expression said she knew it was a lie but loved her enough not to push. The truth was Amy didn't know what she felt anymore. Grief for a man who wasn't dead. Gratitude for a rescue she hadn't known she needed. Anger at a world where people like Nicholas had to choose between murder and martyrdom. And underneath it all, a strange hollowness, where something new had been building and was now gone. She went to work that afternoon, walked through the familiar doors of Carlisle Steakhouse, tied on her apron. Everything looked the same. The corner table where Nicholas had sat was occupied by a young couple celebrating an anniversary. The window where a killer had waited now framed an elderly man reading a newspaper. Normal people, normal moments. No hidden geometry of violence, no invisible wars. Or maybe there were, and Amy just couldn't see them anymore without Nicholas's eyes to guide her. "Table 4 needs water," Richard called, and Amy moved automatically. She refilled glasses, took orders, smiled through her exhaustion. All the practiced motions of survival she'd perfected over years of double shifts and financial pressure. But something had changed. She found herself watching the room differently now. Noticing the man who checked his watch too often. The woman whose eyes tracked exits instead of her date. The small irregularities that might mean nothing or might mean everything. Nicholas had taught her to see danger even in his absence. At the end of her shift, Sophia found her in the break room. "You know that man's not coming back, right?" Amy nodded, throat tight. "Good. Because waiting for ghosts will kill you slower than bullets." Sophia sat beside her. "But you're allowed to grieve him. Even dangerous men can be worth mourning." "He wasn't just dangerous," Amy whispered. "He was complicated. Most people are. We just don't usually see it." Amy thought about tattooed hands and whispered commands and the way Nicholas had looked at her like she represented something sacred in a profane world. "I don't even know his real name," she said. "Nicholas De Angelis might be fake, an identity he wore like his suit. Does it matter?" "No. Yes, I don't know." Amy pressed her palms against her eyes. "How do you mourn someone who's still alive somewhere?" "The same way you mourn anyone who's gone. You acknowledge they mattered. You carry what they taught you. And you keep living the life they died to protect." The words settled into Amy's chest like stones in deep water, heavy but stabilizing. She went home that night, kissed her mother goodnight, texted encouragement to Daniela about her upcoming calculus test. The ordinary mathematics of a life that mattered because someone had chosen to preserve it. In bed, Amy pulled out the card Nicholas had left. "You're safe now. Stay that way." She'd read those words 100 times, but tonight she heard them differently. Not as a warning, as a promise, as the last gift a dying man could give. She slept better than she had in days. The next morning, Amy woke early and did something she'd been putting off for months. She pulled out her laptop and searched for small business loans, cafe spaces for rent, equipment suppliers, all the practical pieces of a dream she'd been too afraid or too broke to pursue. But Nicholas had told her to open that cafe, had seen her dream before she'd spoken it aloud, and somehow, honoring his sacrifice meant building the life he'd believed she deserved. So she started planning, not just dreaming, but actively constructing a future. Because the most powerful way to honor someone's sacrifice wasn't to mourn it forever. It was to live so fully, so completely, that their choice became worth making. Amy Bell would open her cafe, would help Daniela graduate, would care for her mother, would build something beautiful from the ashes of a night that should have killed her. And somewhere, in federal protection or witness relocation, or whatever silent prison he'd chosen, Nicholas DeAngelis would know that his one good choice had mattered, that the waitress he'd saved hadn't just survived, she'd flourished. That sometimes, when dangerous men choose to protect instead of destroy, they don't just save lives, they change them. Outside, the rain finally stopped. The sun broke through clouds in sharp golden beams, painting the city in light that felt earned. And Amy Bell stepped into it, carrying the weight of a man's sacrifice like armor and grace in equal measure, choosing life, choosing joy, choosing to honor his silence by never forgetting it mattered. Thanks for staying with this story. Right till the final moment, you're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.